Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name's Imani Rupert-Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I know there's some new faces in the room, so before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit more about NCLR with you. This is an amazing time for us because NCLR is celebrating 45 years of service this year. That's 45 years of serving the entire LGBTQ community, 45 years of leading by example. Something we don't always mention is that NCLR is a fraction of the size of other national LGBTQ organizations that do similar work as we do. But that doesn't mean that we aren't leading. Just like our family law program built the infrastructure that supports all families across the country, NCLR has a long history of leading in the movement. We are the first national organization to have an LGBTQ specific immigration and asylum program. And to this day, we have an unblemished record of winning 100% of our asylum cases. We are also the first national LGBTQ organization to have a youth project recognizing experiences specific to LGBTQ youth. We are also the first national organization to take on banning conversion therapy, and we continue to lead in that work through our Born Perfect campaign. And our programs like Rural Pride and leading the LGBTQ Anti-Poverty Network and Common Ground continue to prioritize communities within the LGBTQ community that experience the highest levels of discrimination. This helps us create a world where everyone is supported. But enough about us. Over the last few days, I know many of us have been watching the confirmation hearings, and the type of questioning that we're seeing Ketanji Brown Jackson facing because she is a Black woman. If this eminently qualified woman is subjected to the vitriol on a televised hearing, what must Black women, women of color, trans women, queer women, women with disabilities, and people with all of these and multiple intersecting identities experience as they look to serve their communities? And as we see these don't say gay bills pop up all over the country, like the one we see in Florida, that would shame LGBTQ youth for their LGBTQ identities or the LGBTQ identities of the people that love them. As we see the anti-trans bills that seek to criminalize parents for loving and caring for their transgender children. It's clear that we need better leadership at every level to speak to the needs of our community and to protect all of our children. This month, we are celebrating International Women's Month. And at NCLR, we're taking this time to recognize the amazing contributions of LGBTQ women. Tonight, we're going to explore the concept of what happens when LGBTQ women lead. And tonight, we have an incredible panel lined up for you. First, we have Minneapolis City Council President Andrea Jenkins. We have New York State Assemblywoman Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas. And finally, we have Laura Ricketts, the incredible activist and board chair of LPAC, the only organization with a mission to build the political capacity of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer women. So we're going to get started. Council President, we are going to start with you. Can you please introduce yourself, describe your role as the City Council President of Minneapolis, and then explain what you're responsible for and how you measure success?
And thank you, Imani, and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this country. And, you know, I do want to just ground my remarks in the fact that I am on indigenous land here in Minneapolis, the unceded territories of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe and so many other Native and indigenous communities, and want to really recognize that, and also that we live in a country that is that was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am the president of the Minneapolis City Council. I am in my second term on the council. I represent the Ward 8 district in South Minneapolis. It unfortunately happens to be the home of the murder of George Floyd incident that has impacted the entire world, one might say, and certainly rocked this nation and this community that I live in. What are the roles of a city council president? Certainly is to represent my my community and provide, I think, leadership and direction to the council that I am a part of, to be a voice for the city of Minneapolis, to lead, my personal goal and mission is to try to bring some healing to my community that has been deeply traumatized by state violence over and over, by the inequities that are really present, making Minneapolis one of the most challenging cities in America for African Americans to live in. And so that's the role and the work that I do on the Minneapolis City Council in a nutshell. And certainly it is much more, but really to be there, be a voice for my community and seek equity, provide access and leadership to the council.
Thank you so much, Council President. Always a pleasure to see you and have you today.
Thank you.
Assemblymember, similar question to you. Please introduce yourself, describe your role, and tell us, what is work well done for you?
Well, thank you, Imani, for having me. And I'm so humbled and honored to actually be here alongside such amazing advocates. So my name is Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I represent Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside in Queens, which is the world's borough of New York City. We have one of the most diverse districts, not just in the city, not just in the state, but in the world. I have probably communities from every corner of the world that I represent, everyone from folks from Tibet to Ecuador to Pakistan to Bangladesh to Peru. It's just an amazing community that I'm representing. And quite honestly, I was the first woman of color, first queer woman, first person of color, first Latina to represent a district that is 62% immigrant and predominantly Latino immigrant, Latinx immigrant. So I'm really humbled to be here and represent my district. I'm a representative of the New York State Assembly, not the lower house, but the people's house. And, we're here to ensure that we're bringing the voices of the people who have been marginalized, invisibilized, and excluded from the political process to the forefront. And I feel like my job is really about elevating the voices of the people most impacted by the policies that we create. And this is something that's really personal to me as a daughter of an immigrant, as a Latina, as a queer woman, as someone who has a disability, as someone who understands the challenges that immigrants face, trying to live, work, raise a family in a place like Queens. It's just really critical that we have someone with the voice, experience, and vision to fight for laws and policies that will support our community and allow them not just to survive in this moment, but to thrive. So I'm really, again, humbled to be in office. I'm in my 15th month in office. I'm a newbie. I took out an incumbent, and I'm actually already running for re-election because it's only a 2-year term. But again, it's just an incredible role. And for me, what success looks like, if I am really adequately doing my job, it is when the undocumented sex worker who has been marginalized from the community feels like they have a voice, that they are important, and they have someone who's fighting for them. And I have to say, one of the first bills I got to speak on was the repeal walking while trans ban, which removed the loitering for the purposes of prostitution. And I made sure I called a member of my community and asked if permission and consent to share her story on the assembly floor, and that's something I did. So I feel really fueled by the community, and uplifted by the community. So if they feel like I'm adequately representing their voice, then I feel like I'm doing a good job. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Assemblymember. It's such a pleasure to have you. And thanks for that story. That was just beautiful. Thank you. Laura, we are so excited to have you. You are an advocate, you're an activist, and the board chair of LPAC. So thrilled to see you again. Could you please introduce yourself and describe the mission of LPAC, but then also what motivates your activism?
Sorry, you didn't unmute there. Thank you, Imani, for hosting us today. And thank you for everything that you and your colleagues at NCLR do. Congratulations on 45 years of impact, really impressive. And I want to thank Council President Jenkins and Assemblymember Gonzalez-Rojas for just for being you, honestly, just for putting yourselves out there and representing and doing the work. It's important to me and it's important to our community. So as you mentioned, I am Laura Ricketts. I live in Chicago. I am chair of LPAC. I'm chair of the board of LPAC, and I'm one of the co-founders of LPAC. We founded LPAC 10 years ago in 2012. And it was founded by a handful of LGBTQ women who were kind of tired of being in fundraisers, political fundraisers, whether was within the LGBT community or for LGBTQ candidates, and being, a handful of women in a group of a lot of men, and largely white gay men and affluent white gay men, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's great that they're there, but that we felt like there needed to be more women represented in the political process. Women, as we know, have a long history of activism and advocacy. Look at NCLR, 45 years, incredible. But women haven't been as active, and both Andrea and Jessica can testify to this in the political arena, and particularly queer women of color as well. So we built LPAC, we formed LPAC, not necessarily hoping to endorse a lot of queer women running for office, but to get more women just engaged in the political process, and to understand you don't have to have $1,000 or $500 or $100 or even $50 to make a difference or have an impact in politics. That if you give together collectively, we can have a significant voice. And it's important, and just to help women understand the importance of playing in that arena. And so we're really a values-based PAC that, and our values are equal rights for LGBTQ women, women's rights, and social justice. And when we first were founded 12 years ago, we were endorsing all types of candidates. I think our first LGBTQ woman candidate was actually Tammy Baldwin, but we endorsed many non-LGBTQ members in that first cycle and for the subsequent cycles. But I'm really proud to say that in the last couple of cycles, we've really just focused on LGBTQ women up and down the ballot because there have been so many of them. A couple of amazing examples are right here that I'm really excited about. And Council President Jenkins is one of our endorsees, and we're very proud to say that. So this cycle, we are on track to endorse more than 150 LGBTQ women. And that is really something we're very proud of. And it's a very dramatic shift for us because there are so many women, running for office now. And not that we have enough by any means, but we're very proud to have played a supporting role and hopefully an inspirational role for a lot of women LGBTQ women running for office.
Laura, thank you so much. Thank you for your activism and your advocacy. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.
So for this next round, Assemblymember, we're going to start with you. I want to know what inspired you to become politically active? And this is kind of an interesting question, but what did you hope to change? What did you actually change? Or what changed in you?
Ooh, yes. So I would argue that, the realities of life have made me politically active. As I mentioned, being a daughter of an immigrant was probably the most impactful thing in my life. My dad came to this country at the age of 16, dropped out of high school because his school did not offer English classes, ESL classes. He then worked and fixed cars, and then he got into technology, and technology in the 70s were like telexes, right? Like these are things that most of us don't even remember. But he sort of worked his way up, and when I was born, it's interesting because my Spanish is actually not very good, because he was punished, right, and oppressed because of the lack of the ability to speak English. So as children, me and my brother were taught to speak English, which I'm now in Spanish classes as a Latina, trying to improve my Spanish. But all those lived experience being in a working class family, it's been really, my activism has been shaped around that. The last 13 years prior to running for office, I ran the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, where we fought for Latinas at the intersection of reproductive justice, health justice, immigration, LGBTQ liberation, and racial justice. And that work really informed my activism. And I have to tell you, after Trump was elected in my community in 2018, which was the following cycle, we saw a wave of women, progressive, badass, women of color, many who are queer, like stepping up and running for office. So my friend Tiffany Caban, who's now a city council member, she calls it the Latina Beltway in Western Queens, where we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who took out one of the most powerful members of Congress in 2018. And we have Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, who's a dreamer, and Senator Jessica Ramos, who took out a longtime leader, and then Tiffany Caban herself ran for district attorney and then ran for city council. There's these layers of reclaiming community that we saw by women of color. And, when that happened, people started turning to me like, is that white guy still there? That pale male and stale guy who was really entrenched and part of the establishment. Was that guy still the assembly member of this district that is 88% people of color? And I was like, oh yeah, he somehow skirted this whole wave of change. And, it took, one person after another person to ask me to run. And I loved my job. I love doing advocacy. It's really valuable in working directly with community. But this was another way to work with community and represent my local community that I was, living, working, and raising my family in. So it really took the power of neighbors, right, to like ask people to run. And there's a statistic that says women have to be asked 7 times or more to run for office. And it took those 7 times to get me to really think about it. But once I got in, it was like I quit my job that I love and I still miss, and really just went all in. And it was difficult. And I have to say, as someone who, has been fighting for certain issues and have been surrounding myself by people who really are supportive of the issues, I think the biggest challenge has been, putting yourself out. It's this vulnerability, right? You have to stand by your principles and your values. You cannot waver. As much pressure as you will get, you have to stay focused. So I think really rooting yourself in values has been my North Star. And I'm not quote Audre Lorde, and I almost quote her at every press conference I'm at. But she says there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And it reminds me why I'm here, because I am fighting for gender equity. I'm fighting for reproductive justice. I'm fighting for criminal justice. I'm fighting for LGBT liberation. I'm fighting for housing justice, right? I'm fighting for health justice. There's immigrant justice even in New York State. As a state rep, there's so many issues that we need to ensure that our immigrant communities can, programs that they can have access to. So for me, it was like holding those values center, those values of equity, dignity, and justice, and reminding myself that I have to bring my true self to the work, my true values to the work, and to really uplift the community that put me here.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing so much about your authenticity too. You said that I am a Latina that is taking Spanish classes, and we know that our identity, the thing is, we all have a unique experience, and
Yeah.
this is an authentic, unique experience, and it doesn't take away anything from where you are. And I just really appreciate your vulnerability here. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Laura, the next question is for you. I have known you for years, and you know that I have been so impressed by your activism, both front and center, but also your work behind the scenes. I wanted to know, why do you think that it's important to elect more LGBTQ women, and what do you think we get when LGBTQ women lead?
Well, I think we just saw a really great example of that in Assemblymember Gonzalez-Rojas' answer. When LGBTQ women run for office and get elected to office, obviously they bring their perspective, they bring their lived experience, they bring their concerns, they bring their needs to that office. And that's so important. It's so important for women, it's important for people of color, it's important for the LGBTQ community. And I personally believe that a representative government is a better government when it actually reflects the people that it governs. And so that's, one point. And the other point is that I think that women, and particularly women, LGBTQ women, bring a different style of leadership. They, perhaps because we're generally more compassionate, empathic, and collaborative, I think that, collective action and collaborative work and community are like women's superpower. And it's also part of the LGBT community's superpower. And when we bring that influence into government, I just think it's going to be a better run, better government. Go figure, that a representative government that actually represents the people and their lived experience is going to be a better government for everybody. But also, I think that, not only are women more collaborative, they bring a different sense of power to government. They're, like I said, they're much more community focused. And I think we need more of that, I'm going to say like ethic, for lack of a better word, in our government. We need to have better informed government, let's say that. And I think that better informed, from my experience, means informed by the lived experiences of the people that government serves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Laura. It's such a pleasure to have you. Thanks for sharing so much.
Thank you.
Council President, I don't mind saying that some of the bravest actions that I have ever seen have come from your leadership. And I want to ask you, how did you decide to move into politics? Why you, and why then?
Wow, well, thank you for that. And I too want to just offer my congratulations on 45 years of doing this really challenging and difficult work. And I think a part of the earlier question was, how do I define success? And so, I just wanted to point out, like, since I've been in office, we banned conversion therapy in the city of Minneapolis. We declared racism a public health crisis. We also created the Department of Race and Equity and began a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is looking at the harms that have been done to Black communities and Native communities, which is a very unique sort of partnership, and it doesn't come without its challenges, but we're working through it, and really getting at the root of why these inequities exist. And so if you have truth and you have reconciliation, you got to have reparations in the middle, right? Because it's a sandwich. You cannot have reconciliation without the repair or the reparations. You know, and I'm really proud of that work. I mean, we passed some safety initiatives for sex workers in our community. When the pandemic hit, we made sure to include trans and not gender nonconforming people, sex workers, non-gig economy workers, people who had been left out of the American Care Act into our support systems. It was, you know, little money relative to what people needed, but we made those investments in those very marginalized communities. And so I'm really proud of so many things that we've been able to do up to this point. And, you know, just this past Monday, I got the Polly Murray Award from the Polly Murray Institute for Social Justice from Duke University. And I got to tell you, of all the many awards and accolades I've gotten, that stands literally at the top of the list. You know, knowing who Polly Murray was and the intersectional life that she lived and that Audre Lorde talked about, that, you know, so many other activists and scholars and thinkers lift up. Polly Murray was one of the originators of those conversations. And so all of those things are extremely proud. But when young people email me and tell me that they are reading my story or they are writing about me in an essay or a project that they are doing, and that happens more often than you would believe. I'm just a Minneapolis City Council member. I show up to do my job every day. But when that happens, I know I am making an impact and influencing young people. I got into public office sort of by accident. You know, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, a very, what I would call a bastion of political life, both electoral politics as well as what I would call nationalism or Black nationalism politics. And so I had this sort of political mindset all along. We walked out of high school to ensure that we could have a Black History Week celebration. I'm aging myself a little bit here. Before it was Black History Month, it was Black History Week. And we wanted to have a celebration. We wanted that in the Assembly Hall. And our principal was like, no. And we walked out of school. So that was one of my first acts of activism. I went to grad school and realized that, you know, politics is a way, you know, you can march, you got to give people services, food, clothing, jobs, shelter. But also you have to, if you march and uncover what those problems are, then how do they get resolved? Through the political process. And so I learned how that can be an impactful way to be a part of the struggle. While I was in graduate school, I met a young person, young man, gay man, Native American man that was running for city council. And he said to me, when I win my race, and I thought he was the longest shot ever, that he would bring me into his office as a policy aide. Well, he won that race, and he did that. And I worked in his office for 3 years, and then I worked for a subsequent city council member for another 12 years, supporting them in the same ward that I represent now. And so I knew the people, I knew the issues, I knew their concerns. And then in 2016, 2017, America elected a reality TV star to be our president. And I knew at that point our democracy was at a very perilous time in American history. And so, and also knew that cities are at the forefront of change in our country, because our state legislatures are mostly Republican led throughout the country, bringing up all the crazy, nasty, vicious attacks that you guys have been talking about. But cities is where progress is being made. Cities is where $15 an hour has passed. Cities is where conversion therapy has been banned, you know, and so cities are leading in those areas. And there was an open seat, and I decided that I am going to seek that seat, and we won with 73% of the vote. And then my last election, I was reelected in 2021, and we won by 83% of the vote. And so, you know, we have a majority POC city council, we have a majority women city council. It's a glorious time to be on this council that is representative of the community that I live in. There are Latinx undocumented city council member. Well, his parents and, you know, are undocumented, and I should not be telling his story, but I mean, it's pretty public information. But he is on the city council, as well as Somali American. Today, we just did a resolution honoring Ramadan and Transgender Day of Visibility on the same day. And so that's why I'm here. That's why representation matters. And hopefully we can continue to elect leaders, women, LGBT identified, trans identified, gender non-conforming, disabled, you know, community members that are going to lift up the issues of marginalized communities and ensure that our concerns are addressed.
Thank you so much, Council President. We are so grateful for your leadership.
Thank you.
So for this next round, Laura, we're going to start with you for the first one. So you'd kind of spoken to this earlier, but I wanted you to just go a bit deeper about what you think the importance is of electing LGBTQ women. But I also, I wanted to get at something that you were talking about a little bit earlier in your introduction. How did you realize that we could elect more LGBTQ women? And as a co-founder of LPAC, could you tell us a bit more about the inspiration of that, like how that came about, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Council President, this one's for Laura, but I'm going to come right back.
Yeah, please, Laura, because it's a tough question. So thank you.
Well, actually, it's an appropriate question for you as well. When you speak of the diversity that you have and the majority of women in the city council there, it's really remarkable. And so I would love to hear more about that. And honestly, I mean, everything that our council president Jenkins just said is speaks to why we need more LGBTQ women in office. I mean, I honestly just got a little choked up when you were talking about all the things that all the things that you're able to accomplish. I can't say it any better. Why we need more women. Why we need more LGBTQ women, excuse me. For what they bring to office and how much we need them. But I think there's something bigger here than just the experience that they bring and the voices, the lived experience and what they represent. We need more women in more LGBTQ women and more women in office, in leadership positions everywhere, in government, in politics, in leading policy, in business. And we need them, and we need to like remove systemic barriers to prevent that from happening on a bigger scale. And the reason why is ultimately we need those women in office to shift the power dynamic and our notions of power. And specifically for this conversation with regard to how we govern ourselves. We need to shift it from what I would argue is now a more male paradigm of power and leadership to a more female paradigm that really, as I said, brings our lived experiences and perspectives, as well as our authentic voices that are compassionate, empathic, and collaborative, generally more collaborative. And I can't overstate how important that is. I honestly believe the fate of our world relies on it. More women in office and more women in positions of leadership, because we need to bring that to power at all levels, and our notions of power and what you do with it and what it means, and the significant impact that it has on people's daily lives, and the feeling of belonging, and that this is theirs. And isn't that what we say we're about in a representative democracy, right? It's ironic that when we founded this country, we had all these great high ideals about people being equal and everyone should have equal representation, but it's never been that way. It's never been that way. It's always been the story of gradually getting there. And I think we're never going to fully get there until we have more women elected to those positions or in those positions of power. So anyway, but you had another question, and I'm still kind of recovering from I was just really touched by everything that Council President Jenkins had to, was talking about. But when did I realize more women could be, more queer women could be elected to office? Was that the question?
Yeah.
I always felt that they could be. It was just a matter of us standing up. It's just a matter of, more women doing so. And I think we've had some great leadership over the years that gradually, but I also, I feel like, we've seen the shift. We mentioned that the previous president and all that, what that represents to so many people. But I always like to say, when we get pushed one step back, we get better, we get smarter, we organize better, especially as the LGBT community, that we, stand up more, and we stand out more, and we take more of a stand. And I think you've seen women do that. I know we've seen women do that over the past few years. And what's really exciting to me at LPAC, we've seen a lot more younger LGBTQ women. We've seen a lot more women of color. I think I mentioned to you that we're on track to endorse more than 150 LGBTQ women running for office across the country at all levels of government. And I'm so incredibly proud that we've already endorsed almost 50, and 40% of those are women of color, and 10% of those are trans candidates, trans women, and I believe about 30% of those are LGBTQ women under the age of 40. And I couldn't be more proud of that. And I would love to say LPAC can take all the credit for that, but we can't. We're just simply finding them and saying, yay for you, let's help you. The truth is that we've all been inspired for whatever reason, whether it's something that we're worried about or concerned about, or just something that we're seeing. I think women are really standing up a lot more, and that has included a lot of LGBTQ women, a lot more women of color, a lot more younger women. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it, specifically, it wasn't a ha, women can do this. Of course we can. There was never a question in my mind, but we're doing it more and more. And of course we need to, continue to grow in numbers. But I'm so optimistic by some of the candidates that we've been able to endorse through LPAC.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for saying that. I think it's important that we name these things and we say them over, because as the assembly member was saying, women have to be touched, asked 7 times, how did we know this could happen? I'm hoping that there's some touches that are happening in this conversation right now. And thanks again too for your vulnerability here. I think it's really important that we recognize that the political is personal for us, and that this is that we have actual feelings, that we have actual needs that aren't met when we don't have folks that are thinking about our experiences. Thank you so much for your vulnerability there. Assemblymember, I want to come back to you. I want to ask, how does your experience inform how your office is led in the work that you do? And when you look back 50 years from now, what do you hope that the leaders that will one day be in your position, what do you think that they will have learned from what you're doing right now?
So I think the values that you, us, we, I live by have to be demonstrated in the way in which you operate as a elected official. So for example, I get a salary, probably a salary better than a lot of other electeds. It's funny, I'm actually at a conference of Latino state legislators, and I know many of them only get about $8,000 a year, or some of them don't get any salary. We get a salary of $110,000 a year, but we get a very small budget for staff. And for me, living my values, the way in which I operate my office is what I want to see in the world. And although we get a small budget, I have a small staff because I try to pay them a living wage. And the assembly doesn't cover travel to the state capitol, which is 3 hours north. And I need my staff to join me, at least one staff member to join me in the capitol when I'm there during session. And I pay out of my campaign money, or oftentimes out of my pocket, because I don't think they should actually pay out of their pocket from a small salary to do their job. Those small things are really meaningful. And I think it's the way in which we are spending our resources to reflect the values that we're promoting in the world. Another example is, mentioning that I have one of the most diverse districts in not just the city and the state, but arguably the country and arguably the world. So language justice is really important to me. And again, the assembly does not pay for translation of materials. So I have to pay for translation of materials. So every week I have a newsletter that is provided in English and Spanish. We didn't have a Spanish speaker on staff that can do the translation, but I pay a interpreter and translator money out of my campaign, out of my pocket, oftentimes, to translate the newsletter into Bengali, because Bengali is the third most spoken language in my community. These are resources that I'm expending myself, that I'm raising money for, that again, I'm often taking out of my own pocket, because it is really important that we exemplify the type of world we want. And it's difficult. It's not easy. A lot of people don't have the campaign coffers. I don't have giant campaign coffers, but I have enough where I can, again, spend the money and make sure that we're doing that. But I would sacrifice my own salary to do that as well. And I think those kind of small actions, but meaningful actions, are really important. So to me, it's about living the values that we are fighting for in the world, creating the conditions in our team that are the conditions that I'm fighting for. We have a wellness check-in with our staff have a small mighty staff. So we have paid interns, right? Like we really try to work really hard to exemplify the fights that we're having on the floor of the assembly. So I think that's something that's really, really important to me. And it's important to have people like us, right? Those of us who maybe from the working class community, again, people of color, people who have these real lived experiences that they're bringing to the table that really understand what it's like to struggle and really understand what it's like to be oppressed and really understand what it's like to experience policy in a way that has actually harmed them, right? And making sure that we're not just doing everything we can to change the policy, but uplifting the stories and experiences, either through our own experiences or the experiences of our community. So that's been a very important way of operating as a state assembly member. I don't see enough people doing that. And it's something that I think we really need to hold our elected officials accountable to, right? How do we treat our staff? There's a IG and Instagram account that's been created for staffers of the state to sort of unload in an anonymous way. And we're hearing stories of sexual assault. We're hearing stories of harassment. We're hearing stories of being yelled at, being mistreated. That's not the world we're fighting for. And we have to, as leaders, really change that paradigm, that elected officials should be the people who understand the policy very viscerally and not be the one perpetuating harm. So that's something that I'm really fighting for. And again, I'm just inspired by this community that's really thinking about ways to change the makeup of people in office. And I just want to tell one quick story about the New York City Council. I'm a state representative, but we had an election of the city council where there was, I think, 35 members of the city council that was term limited, and all 51 members were up for re-election. And there was a campaign called 21 and 21, where years ago they would say, we want 21 women in office by 2021. And let me tell you, we blew that number out of the office. We got 31 women in office, mostly women of color, many who are queer, and have most who are working class. It's just been incredible to see what that means. And they are fighting for the world that I want to see, that I want to see for our children, our great-grandchildren. And the council president, acknowledged the land, acknowledged the stolen land and territories we're sitting on. And often when I think about that, I have to honor that we want to think about the next 7 generations in our work, right? To acknowledge what the harm that's happened in the past, but how do we heal for our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on. So that's what I want to leave behind, a world where our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren don't have to fight the fights that we're having right now, and can fight even broader, more progressive fights because we've solved those problems. That's what I hope to do. And I hope to do it by living my values, and I hope to do it by fighting for the systemic change that we all need in this world.
Thank you so much. That is absolutely beautiful. And I just want to lift up too what it means to pay people a living wage, what it means to pay interns. It makes it possible for people that wouldn't otherwise be able to be working on in your office, to be working on campaigns. It really changes who gets involved when they get involved, and it ultimately helps getting other folks running and other people elected. And so I just want to really lift up what you're doing there. It sounds like it's simple, but we know it's not. That money comes out of your pockets in ways that it doesn't to others. And so that is truly living your values. That's admirable. Thank you so much. Council President, you are up next. I wanted to ask you, what has been the most challenging task that you've been presented with as a leader and as an elected official? How did you think through that, and what did you learn?
Oh boy, there have been a lot of challenging tasks. As a leader generally, as a city council member, today was difficult. I think really in this time, if I have to generalize a little bit, or if I can generalize a little bit, really working on public safety has been one of the most challenging aspects of being an elected official at the municipal level for me. You know, we've had several high-profile incidents of state violence perpetrated against Black men, many unarmed. It has prompted, you know, the conversation that, you know, has been under the surface for a while, but in June 2020, it became a national conversation, defund the police. That emanated right here in Minneapolis. And that has led to some really sleepless nights and some deeply, I think, challenging conversations, interactions, debates, etc. You know, as I thought through it, and you know, one of the challenges is that, you know, in communities of color, people are, because of the systemic challenges that make our communities, you know, more susceptible to relying on the underground economy that brings with it violence and crime. We have a need for police in our communities, but we need those police officers to be accountable, professional, well-trained, members of our community, and really not looking at these issues as us against them, which so many police departments are around the country, and certainly here in Minneapolis. So if I had to say one leadership challenge, that would be it. How do you sort of recognize that we have a need to have a lawful society? If we are going to be a nation of laws, then we need somebody to enforce those laws. But how do we ensure that those laws are being enforced equitably, humanely, respectfully, and that there is real accountability if those, you know, things are not accomplished? And that has been a very difficult conversation and leadership challenge to be involved in.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I think it's really important for folks to realize, like, the things that you're grappling with, that there's not a right answer and a wrong answer. Oftentimes, it's being creative, it's learning more from folks, it's listening to folks. We just have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you to just go and take just 1 minute, because we only have just a little bit of time left. And I want to ask this last question. There are folks right now that are leaders, and they are the leaders that we need. How have you seen people get into politics, and where did they start? And in a moment that we are seeing these anti-trans bills, these don't say gay bills, how can people make a difference where they live? Laura, I wanted to start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think first and foremost, you should know who your representatives are, and you should have a relationship with them, even when there's not an issue like the ones that you're talking about. And I found that some people shy away from that, but they work for you all. They work for you. They're elected by you, they serve at your pleasure, and they work for you. So you should have a relationship with them, and they should know what's important to you. If there are particular issues that I would organize around those issues. There are also organizations out there that advocate for certain issues or are champions. I would get involved with them and find places in your community where you could find people already doing some of that work. Honestly, I think that the single most important thing that any of us can do is really talk to our representatives at all levels. And you don't need to be a VIP. They're there to represent you, and they should be talking to you. And you should, organize other people to go talk with them because they need to know your issues. They need to understand what's important to you. They need to understand how their work's impacting your life, and they need to serve you.
Thank you so much. I think that's exactly right. Assembly member, what about you? What do folks need to, at a time like this, how can people make a difference where they live? How can they get started?
Yesterday, I was visited by a group of 12-year-olds from my district. And I took them around the Capitol, and I took them to a rally for excluded workers and immigrant justice. And then we sat in our office because they wanted to lobby me. And they said, we don't want police in our schools. We want mental health professionals in our schools, and we want investment in our young people. And that's when I know that the kids are all right. Queens is the future. And that we have a generation that's really holding us as elected officials accountable. And that's what needs to happen. To Laura's point, you all, the public, are our bosses. And when I work with a group of Latinas who were undocumented, didn't speak English, low income, I always told them, your voice matters, your story matters, and you're their boss. So when you meet with your Congress member, when you meet with your city council member, when you meet with your state rep, you share what's important to you because you are their boss. Doesn't matter the language you speak, doesn't matter your immigration status, doesn't matter how much money you have in your pocket, you're their boss. So that's just to hold that and know that we as electeds are accountable to the community, and your voice and your stories and your perspective and your solutions matter.
Right. Thank you so much, Assemblymember. Council President, last word is yours. What do people need to do in this moment? How can they make a difference where they live?
Well, I will just start out with a message that we heard from Supreme Court Justice nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson, and that is persevere. And, just in my own life, I started college in 1979, and I obtained my first bachelor's degree in 1999. So it took 20 years. But when I was in my first year in college, I met a woman on the campus of the University of Minnesota who said, hey, hang in there. One day you might go to Harvard University. And in 2018, I did go to Harvard University and received a certificate in leadership for senior government officials. And so perseverance paid off. And I think, both my distinguished colleagues said it best in terms of getting engaged, getting involved, knowing who your representatives are, meeting with them. I really appreciate the notion that don't just contact your representative when it relates to a issue, but build relationships. Let's grow and develop the work, the policies that we need in our communities together. so that we can make the best policies that are going to have a positive impact for the most people in our communities, centering those who are most marginalized in our communities.
That's exactly it. Thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our amazing panelists for sharing your brilliance with us. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for your strength, and I want to thank you for your courage. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in community with you. You're making the world better for everyone. Finally, if you learned something today, you can find out more about NCLR's work at nclrights.org. One of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes is, I did then what I knew best. When I knew better, I did better. I look forward to doing better with all of you. Happy International Women's Month. Take good care.
Thank you.